All right, boys and girls, here's our final chapter, chapter 18 of The Frog Princess. When I woke, my head felt woozy. Nothing would come into focus. Gradually, my vision sharpened, but everything looked different. The colors seemed duller, and there were fewer of them. I shook my head, trying to get rid of that funny feeling in my ears, not liking the way the sounds were muffled. Glancing down, I saw that my clothes looked just the way they had on the day I had turned into a frog. My blue gown and kirtle were only slightly soiled, but no more than they had been when I kissed Edric. My soft leather shoes were still damp, the mud on them fresh. I heard a sound and turned to see Edric struggling to sit up beside me. He was wearing a warm traveling cloak over his clothes, and his boots were splattered with muck. His tousled brown curls framed a strong jaw, laughing eyes, and a nose as prominent as my own. He was slightly pudgy and rather short. I thought that he was the most beautiful person I had ever seen. Edric looked at me and grinned. "We did it," he said, laughing out loud. "Finally," I agreed. I had been convinced so often over the last few days that I was about to die that I felt giddy with relief now that I was a human again. "You look beautiful, Emma. You do too. But aren't you tired of wearing those wings?" He reached behind me and tugged something loose from the back of my dress. The dragonfly wings lay in his hand, limp and broken. "Oh," I breathed, taking the wings from him. "I'll cherish them forever." "These old things?" said Edric. "Why would you want to keep them?" "Edric, how can you say that? They made me look like a beautiful swamp fairy." When I tried to stand, my movements were stiff and awkward. I took a step and tripped over my own feet, landing in Edric's arms. He held me with my head cradled on his shoulder so that I was looking up into his eyes. "I was hoping I could get another kiss," he said, his eyes laughing. "You never give up, do you? Well, I'm sorry. I'm not kissing anybody until I get this back to my Aunt Rosina." I raised my arm and jiggled my bracelet next to his ear. "I don't want to take any chances," Edric finished for me. "We'd better be careful, and we're gonna end up finishing each other's sentences like Clifford and Louise." "Who?" Edric asked. "Never mind. I'll tell you all about it when we have time." Something snorted, sounding like the chuffing of an ancient dragon. Startled, Edric and I looked up. A white horse with a silver mane lay on its side, trying to roll to its feet. Saddled for riding, it wore the trappings of royalty. "Edric, why did you run away?" whined the horse. "Brighty?" said Edric, shading his eyes against the sun. "Is that you?" "Who's Brighty?" I asked. "My horse, Bright Country. I left him tied to a tree while I hunted for meadwort, and that's when I ran into Moudine. I was so worried about you, boy." With a lunge and a flurry of hooves, Brighty rolled to his feet and stood with his legs wobbling beneath him. "Dang, I'm sore," he grumbled. He snorted again and looked toward Edric, who dumped me on the ground and climbed painfully to his feet. "Hey," I said, struggling to sit up. "Why'd you do that?" "I've got to go. It's Brighty." I looked at his horse again. There was something about... "That's where the dog was standing when we kissed," I said. "The big white dog that was chasing you." "You don't suppose that Moudine cast a spell on Brighty, too?" "I guess it's possible. Then the reason the dog was chasing us..." Edric stumbled toward his horse. "Brighty, I always knew you were a good and faithful beast. You wanted to be with me, even when I was a frog." With a happy sigh, Edric flung his arms around the horse's neck and hugged him. Brighty leaned into his owner, making the prince stagger back. The horse snorted, his breath ruffling Edric's hair. "I've been looking for you everywhere. I saw that woman turn you into a frog, then she came after me. I was a dog, Edric. You can't imagine what it's like. I had this urge to sniff everything, and some things were really disgusting, and I didn't want to eat them, but I couldn't help myself. I'm so glad I found you. I knew if I did, everything would be all right. Don't ever leave me like that again." "Everything will be fine now, Brighty. I'm here," said Edric, hugging his horse again. I smiled and let out an unladylike snort of my own. "I bet your horse would kiss you if you'd let him." "I wouldn't dare," said Edric. "With all that magic that's floating around here today, there's no telling what might happen." "Speaking of magic, we'd better go see what happened to my aunt. That look on her face, it was almost like someone had cast a spell on her, and she was going toward those flowers." Leading Brighty by the reins, Edric followed me through the meadow to the riverbank. Everything looked so smaller than it had when we were frogs that I felt as though we'd entered a different world. The weeds that had shaded us from the heat of the sun now brushed against our ankles. I almost missed the clump of tall grass, for now it rose no higher than my knees. It was disconcerting to see the world so radically changed, and I know it bothered Edric as much as it did me, because I caught him rubbing his eyes and staring at what we would once have considered an enormous butterfly, but now it seemed only average. I heard voices talking as we neared the willow. I even thought I heard Grassina laugh. After persuading Edric to tie his horse reins to a convenient branch, I hiked up the hem of my gown and clambered on awkwardly over the uneven ground in search of my Aunt Grassina. Still following the voices, we passed the den, and there, just beyond a jumble of rocks that jutted into the river, I found her with the otter curled at her feet. She glanced up at the sound of our approach, and I was stunned. Her smile was filled with so much joy that even her eyes sparkled with it. "He wasn't a frog at all," she said, taking the otter's paw in her hand. "That's why I couldn't find him. I kissed all those frogs for nothing. My mother turned him into an otter, Emma. Edric, I'd like you to meet Hayward, my betrothed." Hayward tore his gaze from Grassina and looked up at me. "So you're Grassina's niece? The family resemblance is extraordinary. And you must be her beau, Edric. Grassina has been telling me about the two of you." "I'm not her beau exactly," Edric said, turning to look at me. "I saw Hayward in the far-seeing ball," said Grassina, "and I had a feeling that it was him. I felt the way I do when someone comes to the door and I know who it is before I open it. Then when I saw him up close, the spell changed his shape, but it couldn't change who he is inside." "If it was that easy, why didn't you know it was me when we came to your door?" Edric said, looking indignant. "You made Emma tell you the whole story, and then you said you still weren't sure it was her." "Because my heart told me that it was Emma at the door, but my head said she couldn't possibly be a frog. She wore the bracelet, so I didn't think it was possible. But I know to trust my heart now, and my heart says that this is the same darling Hayward whom my mother sent away. I'm a bit older, though, I'm afraid," the otter said, patting his hand with his other paw. "Not so old, Hayward. No older than I." The otter gazed into my aunt's eyes. "My darling Grassina, I wish we could go back to the way things were. That's all I've wanted for these many years. Do you think it's possible?" "Oh, Hayward," said Grassina, "I would like that more than anything in the world." "Kiss her," said Edric, "and see what happens." He grinned and turned to look at me. Seeing the surprised expression on my face, he added, "Well, it worked for us, didn't it?" "Not at first. Aunt Grassina, you aren't wearing any charm reversal jewelry, are you? No bracelets or necklaces or anything like that?" "No, Emma, I'm not." "Then what are you waiting for?" Edric asked, rocking back and forth on the balls of his feet, as he couldn't possibly hold still. "Nothing," Grassina said, and bent down till her mouth was only inches from Hayward's. Her hair fell forward to hide their faces, but they both had dreamy looks in their eyes when they finally drew apart. He waited for a while, watching Hayward for any sign of change. As time dragged on, we realized that nothing was going to happen. Hayward's face fell, and Grassina let out a heartfelt sigh. "I didn't expect it to work," said Hayward, "but I was hoping." Only a few weeks before, I probably would have thought it bizarre to see my aunt and an otter looking at each other with such adoration, but living as a frog has made me much more sympathetic. "I know what we can do," I said, too excited to keep quiet any longer. Everyone turned to look at me, but I plowed on, convinced that I was right. "Hayward, do you remember what my grandmother said you had to do to break the spell?" The otter shook his head. "I'm sure she told me, but it's been so long. Something about dragon's breath and the lining of some seashell." "Drat!" I said. "I knew we'd find a use for that vial. But that's all right, because the spell can be undone by the witch who cast it in the first place. All you have to do is go see grandmother." "What makes you think she would do it?" asked Hayward. "She probably won't like me any better now than she did before." "She'll do it, you'll see. You'll just have to explain things to her the right way. Every time we visit her, she complains that she has only one grandchild, me. But if she changed Hayward back, and you two got married, then she could have more grandchildren," exclaimed Edric. "Unless you're too old." "Edric, please," said Grassina, blushing a deep shade of pink, a color I'd never seen on my aunt. "I think Emma's idea is wonderful," Hayward declared, "and after Grassina and I are married, I'll return to my studies. Perhaps we can open a practice together, just as we'd planned." From the way Grassina and Hayward looked at each other, I knew that Edric and I were in the way, but there was something I had to do before we left. "Here," I said, removing the bracelet and handing it to Grassina. "Although it's a lovely bracelet, I don't think I'd ever be comfortable wearing it again." "I don't blame you," my aunt said, taking her eyes off Hayward only long enough to drop the bracelet into the pouch attached to her gown. "And if I were to kiss someone now?" "Oh, you wouldn't turn into anything." "Good," I said. "Then it's finally over. I just have one other question. Why can Edric and I still talk to animals even though we're human again?" "Because you've been animals yourselves. Since you're a witch, Emma, You'll keep the ability, although Edric may lose it if he doesn't practice often. Is there anything else? Christina asked, flicking her eyes in my direction. I knew her well enough to take the hint. Not a thing. Come on, Edric, let's go. Although I would have liked to left gracefully, Edric and I both were so stiff that we had to help each other up the hill. When we reached the top, I saw an ancient oak whose graying bark bore a small carved heart surrounding the words Christina and Haywood forever. It made me realize that Haywood had probably missed Christina as much as she missed him. Now that I knew the truth about Haywood, things that I hadn't noticed before seemed obvious. Passing his den on our way to fetch Bright Country, I saw a patch of dried grass by the opening that looked remarkably like a doormat. A collection of roughly assembled twigs resembled a crude bench. Lavender, rosemary, and thyme grew in neat little rows on the side of the hill like a miniature herb garden. Haywood may have been turned into an otter, but he had gone to a lot of trouble to make his den into a vaguely human home. After collecting Bright Country, we made our way along the river bank, too sore to move much faster than a slow shuffle. We hadn't gone far before Edric and I stopped to stretch our aching muscles. And what about us? Edric asked, trying to work the stiffness out of his shoulders. Well, now that that's settled, I can get started on other things I have to do. Such as this, I said. Edric's eyes grew wide when I slid my arms behind his neck and kissed him. It wasn't a quick kiss like the first one that had turned me into a frog, or a lip-crushing kind that intended to turn us back, but a long, slow kiss that was soft and gentle and very sweet. Wow, said Edric, his eyes as big as fruit tarts. Somehow his arms had found his way around me while we kissed, and it was a very pleasant feeling indeed. Oh my, I agreed, enjoying it as much as he had. And now what? He asked. And now I have to have the moat cleaned out. And marry that jerk, Prince George? Of course not. I'll just tell my mother that I won't marry him. If she insists, I'll inform her that I can't wait to tell his parents all about my adventures as a frog. My mother would never live that one down. And if he's lucky, maybe George will find the perfect woman for him, one who wears the same size shoes he does. His feet are kind of small. It might take him a while to find her. I'm sure he'll manage. People like him always do. You know, I've been thinking. You could tell your mother that you met someone else you'd rather marry. Is that a marriage proposal, Prince Edric? Would you say yes if it were, Prince Esmeralda? Maybe. I don't think I'll get married just yet. I have the potential to be a very good witch, and I think it's about time I began working at it. And even if I do decide to get married later on, being a witch could be very helpful. My days as a frog has taught me many things, most of which I'd long suspected. The swamp was indeed a magical place where old lives could end and new lives could take the most unexpected turns, where friends and heroes could come in many forms, and where life could be wonderful even for a clumsy princess. Edric reached out to tuck a loose curl behind my ear. Fine, just promise you'll never turn me into some loathsome creature if we happen to disagree. I promise I won't turn you into anything you don't deserve, I said. Just don't ever try to stop me from visiting the swamp from time to time. Is that all it'll take to keep you happy? No, but it's a good start.